Hey everybody, welcome back to the Rooted Coop channel. Today we're going to be discussing batching oil for soap making, what it means and how to do it. Hopefully this is helpful information and hopefully I can explain it in a way that makes it something that you will want to try for your soap making needs as well. Batching oil is a great time saver for soap making. It allows you to measure all of your oil that you need in a large quantity, and then when you're ready to make a single batch of soap, you just simply need to pour off the amount of oil that you need to use for that particular batch. This method involves creating a larger quantity of your base oil and then dividing them for individual recipes. Let's dive into a base recipe, how to scale it, and the pros and cons of batching. Here's the base recipe that we're going to be working with today. It is 40% olive oil, 30% coconut oil, 20% palm oil, 10% castor oil for a total of 100% oil. This formula keeps things simple and versatile, working well for many soap recipes. So for the example that I just gave, to make a 16-ounce batch of soap, we would use 6.4 ounces of olive oil, 4.8 ounces of coconut oil, 3.2 ounces of palm, and 1.6 ounces of castor oil, bringing our total of oils to 16 total ounces. And here's an example of what the recipe I just described would look like on the soapcalc.net format. So as you can see, it is a 1 pound batch. It's going to have a grand total of 16 ounces of oil. In the recipe that I just read off with the olive, coconut, palm, and castor oil, it also gets into the water amount and the lye amount that would be needed for this 1 pound batch of soap. So now let's double this recipe and make a 2 pound batch of oil or 32 ounce batches of oil. And so we would just double everything. Our olive oil would turn into 12.8 ounces, coconut oil would bump up to 9.6, palm oil 6.4, castor oil 3.2 ounces. And so I'm trying to show this on a small scale so the numbers are not overwhelming. Normally when someone batches oil, they would do many ounces of oil to do multiple batches, but I wanted to keep the numbers simple to help explain the process in a way that then you can formulate the recipe that works best for you and your soaping needs. Here is the recipe doubled into a 2 pound batch, ran through the soap calculator to make sure all of our numbers are correct. That is one of the wonderful things about the soap calc recipes, is that you can go in and change the amount of oil that you're needing, and that way your recipe is perfectly formulated for the batch of soap that you're making. So as you can see at the top, the total oil weight is 2 pounds, and then when you read through it, doubled the amount of water, the lye. The oil is now at 32 ounces, and you can see the breakdown explaining all of the amount of oil that you would need to double this recipe. And then once you have your batch measured out, you would weigh out the required amount of oil for the recipe. So the example that I'm using with the batch oil was 32 ounces. The first recipe that I showed, we only needed 16 ounces. So you would just simply measure out 16 ounces of the oil that you needed, and then the remaining oil would be able to be waiting on you for when you're ready to make your next batch of oil. And I'm trying to show in the quantities that I'm showing in a smaller amount just to help keep the math a little simpler. So you're going to need to adjust the quantities as needed for your recipe size. So for example, if you're going to go and make 10 batches of soap and you need the 16 ounces for each batch, then you would need 160 ounces of your base oil for your batch. Whatever your ratios that you're using, but this is how you can figure that out, and the soap calculator figures everything out for you, and it makes it so much simpler The benefits to me for batching oil is it saves time, there's consistency, and it's easier to scale up on the production. Okay, so if there's benefits, what are the cons? Well, some of the cons is that it does require upfront time and planning. It limits the flexibility of trying different recipes, and it's best suited for once you have a staple recipe rather than the experimental ones. And some final tips. Batch only oils that you use frequently to avoid excess storage. Label and date your batch containers for easy tracking, and always recheck your ratios if you add or substitute any ingredients. Here's some footage of me actually batching my oils. I had actually done this and forgot to hit record, so I ended up needing to do this all over again to be able to show y'all what I was working on. So what I do is, my recipe is a staple recipe. It's the same recipe I use in all of my batches. Occasionally I do make something different that would require a different recipe, so batching wouldn't be ideal for this. But when I'm making soap, I typically set aside a day that I know I'm going to make several loaves of soap that day, and I will go the day before or the evening before, whatever, and I will measure all of my oils out. One of the benefits is if your recipe has hard oils such as coconut or palm, or if you're using butters in your recipe, you can melt this more gently and have it all in one batch, have it all sitting there ready to go. And then when you're ready to make soap, you just simply need to pour out the amount of oil that you need for whatever size batch that you're making. Another pro is if I have my batch oils ready and I need to just do a tiny sample batch of, let's say I needed to do an 8-ounce batch or something to test a fragrance or to see how something would behave, I can just formulate that using this, and I don't have to measure all of those tiny amounts of oil out. It also can allow you the measuring to be a little bit easier, because again, when you're doing this multiplied up, you're not having to pour such small amounts of oil depending on what recipe you have formulated. I have this large stock pot that's what I use to store my oil in. A 5-gallon bucket with a lid would be amazing. For my purposes though, I typically do this and make my soap that day or the next day. I don't typically leave soaping oil in this pot for an extended period of time. I just batch up what I know I'm going to be making within that week. My coconut oil was already soft, so I didn't have to melt it down. And my palm oil was also a little bit on the soft side, and so I didn't have to melt it. But I did use the stick blender to kind of blend it up a little bit to help break down those chunks, just to make it a little bit more blended into my oil. I've also just put out the lye water video using the ice cubes, and I kind of discussed in there that I had doubled the amount. And so that's another thing. You can also batch your lye water. There's multiple ways of doing that. There is the 50-50 blend, and then there's also doing like what I did. You measure the amount that you would need for however many batches that you're going to be making to allow that to come to the correct temperature. So when you're ready to make soap, you don't have to wait. Everything is ready to go. It's just a matter of getting it all put together. But yeah, I'm just measuring my different oils into this container and then transferring it all over into my large stock pot, so that way it is there and ready for me whenever I am going to start making soap. I've sped this up to be like 2 times the speed, just to kind of make it go a little bit faster. But again, just wanted to discuss some tips and tricks that could be helpful. The amount of time that you can keep this basically depends on whatever the shortest shelf life of the oil that you're using. So whichever oil is going to spoil the fastest, that would be the length of time that you could keep this. Again, I pour mine up and make it up and use it that week. I don't keep mine for an extended period of time because that's what works best for me. By doing this, it also does allow I want to go make that, and I don't have to measure all of the 6 or 7 different oils that I use in my batch. I already have it measured up that week, and so then that's what I'm going to work on for that week. So it does help speed things along for me. It cuts down the amount of dirty dishes, which all soap makers, I think, hate doing the dishes. So it cuts down on that because I'm able to measure once and for this master batch, and then I just have to pour off the amount of oil, stir and pour off the amount of oil that I need for the batch. I'm also going to show that here at the end because I measured this up and then I went ahead and poured off the 32 ounces that I needed for the batch that I would be making next. I believe I was making the mahogany teakwood next, so I'll try to post that video next week. So I'm getting everything prepped now, and I'm just going to pour off my oil that I need for this batch. And again, I try not to fill my pot too full to make it difficult for me to pour off. If I wasn't comfortable pouring this off, or if I had needed to heat this and wasn't feeling that it was safe, you could use a ladle or something like that to dip off the amount of oil that you need after you stirred it all together. You can see that it's mostly mixed together. There are a few little pieces of the coconut and the palm still floating, but that will definitely be taken care of as soon as this starts being turned into soap. I've got my batch lye water here in the back corner of the video. You might be able to see, letting it finish come to the correct temperature. Well, hopefully this video was very helpful and educational. I was trying to explain this to you guys in a way that made sense. I know it's something that I struggled to be able to figure out, and wanted to see if my explanation could be helpful. Thanks for joining me on this batching journey. If you try batching oils yourself, please let me know how it works out. For more tips and tricks, stay tuned, and as always, stay clean, stay creative, and stay rooted. Bye for now, y'all.